Alright, so the claim I'm refuting today is that Greek life, more specifically fraternities, make college campuses unsafe. And so the advocate's secondary claims are that 1, fraternity men are more likely to perpetrate rape, and 2, the hazing ritual men must go through are dangerous and degrading. So refuting the first claim that fraternity men are more likely to perpetrate rape, the advocate uses a piece of evidence that says that 20 to 25% of women will be sexually assaulted in college, and that the number jumps up to 74% when looking at women of a sorority. So the first issue with this is that it doesn't actually have to do with fraternity men sexually assaulting women, it just has to do with women being sexually assaulted in general. So another issue is that the evidence claims that that these sexual assaults will happen. So it's kind of hard to determine something that will happen when there's not much other evidence with this. And so I went back and I looked at the source that was cited, and it turns out that this is actually an opinion article that was more about fraternity men that will rape, and this already has some bias in general. And that all the sources that they use in the article are stated as numerous sources. So these sources, numerous sources, are not reliable because we don't know where they came from, and we don't know if there was any expert testimony with these as well. And so I looked it up, and according to the National Institute of Justice, which is known for publishing facts about crimes and stuff, so they said that almost a quarter of sexual assault victims were sorority members. So the numbers that the advocate said were not entirely true. So another claim for this was that the advocate made the claim that fraternity are more likely to perpetrate rape. However, there is insufficient evidence cited. So the only evidence that is cited were that 3-to-1 fraternity men are more likely to perpetrate rape rather than non-affiliated men, and this is from the same article that was stated above that was an opinion. And the other evidence is that the speaker's friend was raped by a fraternity male at a fraternity party. So while the personal example was strong, this does not mean that all fraternity men have a higher chance to perpetrate rape. So in fact, Rebecca Stotzer and Daniela McCartney, who are 2 sociology researchers who focus on gender inequalities and gender behavior, they said that there is actually little evidence that fraternity membership alone perpetrates rape. So, and then they also found that characteristics like self-control and social environment were more influenced to perpetrate rape than rather just being in a male group. So also, Martin Schwartz, who is a criminologist who specializes in the cases of sexual assaults, claims that most evidence that people use for the claim that fraternity men rape more are not actually valid because the studies do not make the comparison between the amount of fraternity men who rape compared to non-fraternity men. He also claimed that these studies combine the number of women who were raped by fraternity men compared, and they combine them with the men who also raped them under the influence of alcohol, making the inclusive that fraternity men are more likely to rape. In fact, when the 2 groups were separated, it showed that a small percentage of these men who raped women were in fraternities, while a large percentage of the men were just men under the influence of alcohol. So it seems that heavy drinking is more related to sexual aggression. So the evidence that was claimed does not actually show that fraternity men themselves are more likely to perpetrate, but rather than the events that fraternities hold, like the parties where the consumption of alcohol is held, are more likely to rape. So moving on to the second secondary claim where the hazing ritual men must go through are dangerous and degrading. There's not really an example of what hazing is. So a definition of hazing as given by the fraternity Phi Gamma Delta is any activity expected of someone joining a group or to maintain full status of a group that humiliates, degrades, or risks emotional and or physical harm regardless of the person's willingness to participate. So a few examples of doing this on the same website are that initiatees are actually forced to consume alcohol, and that the other members will beat, they will paddle, and they will physically abuse the new recruits. So the advocate went on to saying that dying was a main danger of this of hazing, but there was no other evidence why that hazing was actually dangerous. So there are actually other reasons why hazing is actually dangerous, and according to hazingprevention.org, hazing is more about control and power and does not build unity. And also, the University of Michigan posted a study that hazing motivates no one. It actually hinders academic achievement, destroys self-esteem, and causes emotional strain and physical harm. So an example of this is in 2014, there was a suicide at Penn State because of all the hazing that he went through, and he just couldn't take it anymore. So people might say, like, why don't we just get rid of fraternities altogether? Well, colleges can't really get rid of fraternities because this will not actually stop hazing, because the fraternities will actually just move to like more of an underground, like less well known, and the hazing will still continue, but the colleges will not be able to get like a grasp on this. So the advocate made a claim that legislation will never get passed. While this is sort of true, because it can't really get passed on the national level, there are state legislation that has passed anti-hazing legislation. Like for example, Southern California is for hazing is either classified as a misdemeanor or a felony, and the person who was hazing receives a fine or a jail time. So to conclude, the claim being responded to, the Greek life is actually making campuses unsafe. The secondary claims do not actually support this claim because fraternity men are not actually more likely to perpetrate rape, and that while the hazing ritual amendments go through is dangerous, there are legislation being passed to prevent this.
All right, well, the first point makes some general challenges against the advocate's evidence, suggesting that it's not particularly specific. You kind of try to undermine the credibility of the evidence by saying it's an opinion piece. It appears to have multiple bias, that it cites numerous sources without specifying any of those sources. In essence, the advocate's evidence is ambiguous as to how it is arriving at those conclusions. Which I think is a reasonable press to make. The National Institute of Justice evidence, though, does seem to suggest that there is a substantial amount of sexual assault against sorority members. Then the question becomes, maybe joining the sorority is the problem instead of being near a fraternity. I assume that the argument that the advocate would make is that the sorority members would be more likely to be subjected to this because of their contact with fraternities. But I don't know exactly how this connection proves the point that the advocate's making, or how it undermines the point that the way that you're trying to make it. I think the better argument that you make is that that there's little evidence to show that these things are related to fraternity membership, and all kinds of evidence to show that they're related to activities sponsored by fraternities. And the primary one being drinking and alcohol consumption. And I think that you did an okay job on this, but it wouldn't be hard to find a little bit more evidence that suggests that a lot of bad things happen when people drink irresponsibly. I mean, it's just like all kinds of stuff. We know drunk driving, but other crimes too, happen when people are under the influence of this. And that in essence what's happening is that the fraternities are getting blamed for what people do when they're intoxicated, and I guess your argument is basically that that's not the responsibility of the fraternity, that's the responsibility of the intoxicant, which I think I understand. But of course the advocate's response would be, well, if they weren't at the fraternity party drinking, then they wouldn't have had that issue in the first place. Well, I don't know. Do college students drink places other than fraternities? Are there other places that they get exposed to those kinds of things? That's where I think you'd need to have a little bit more argument there. On the hazing issue, you give a better example of somebody dying than the advocate does. I'm not exactly sure that helps your case all that much. The suggestion that some hazing might not be all that dangerous, or there might even be information that suggests that fraternities in particular don't participate in any organized hazing, it's all informal hazing. The notion that there won't be any laws passed, I think that you cite some pretty good examples on that last point, suggesting that there, in California at least, that there are laws against hazing, and I suspect that there are similar laws in other places as well. It would probably be a good idea to address that issue. And by the way, there are also laws against sexual assault, and the definition of sex with somebody who is intoxicated nowadays is pretty much determined that is in fact assault. If the courts are not enforcing the laws, that seems like it's a different issue. And I thought you had some pretty good presses on these points. I'm not exactly sure that we've got a definitive answer on either of these points, but we've got at least the start of an argument here, so that's good enough for the moment. Thank you.